When I found the earring under the couch, I told myself it was mine. That was the first lie. It was a small, thick silver, a teardrop shape with a tiny crystal at the center. I don't even wear earrings like that. But when you love someone, you learn to explain away the impossible. You learn to choose peace, even if it's built on silence. That evening, the house was unusually quiet. The kids were staying at my sister's, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that filled the space. I stood there in our living room, holding that little earring between my fingers like it was a truth I wasn't ready to face. By the time Michael came home, I had convinced myself I'd dropped it months ago. I even smiled at him, cooked dinner, and asked about his day. He kissed my cheek, thanked me for the roast, and said he was tired. That night, I lay beside him in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun shadows around the room. I thought about how love can sometimes turn into loyalty long after the love itself has started to fade. But for all of this, before the cracks and the silence, we were ordinary. Michael and I had been married 12 years. He was a mortgage broker, steady, careful, predictable. I worked part-time at the local library. Our lives were simple. We had 2 kids, Marcus and Ella, and a small 2-story house in a quiet suburb outside of Atlanta. The kind of neighborhood where people waved from their driveways, and lawnmowers hummed on Saturday mornings. Our home always smelled faintly of cinnamon because I loved baking on weekends. The kids' drawings covered the fridge, and Michael's suits lined the hallway closet like soldiers. I used to think we were safe, solid. But safety, I learned, is an illusion that disappears the moment you stop looking closely. The first clue came long before the earring. It was the perfume. Michael had always hated strong scents. When we first dated, he used to joke that walking past perfume counters gave him a headache. But one day, I hugged him before he left for work, and there it was, a faint, floral scent I didn't recognize. Not laundry detergent, not my lotion, something softer, sweeter. I pulled back slightly, confused. He smiled. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "You smell different." He laughed. "Probably from the office. You know how people spray half a bottle of cologne in there?" I nodded. I wanted to believe him, but that scent lingered in the air long after he'd gone. A few weeks later, he started coming home later. "Late closings," he said. "New clients, paperwork backlog." The excuses were smooth, like stones worn down by water. One night, after the kids went to bed, I heated up his dinner and waited. Midnight came. Then 1. He didn't call. I tried his phone, no answer. When he finally walked in at 1:40 a.m., his shirt untucked, his hair messy. I didn't ask questions. Instead, I said softly, "You missed dinner." He sighed. "Yeah, I'm sorry, babe. Long day." Then he kissed my forehead like I was the child in the house, not his wife. I found out about the affair 3 months later. It wasn't dramatic. There wasn't a scene or a shouting match. It was an accident. I was doing laundry when I noticed his phone buzzing on the dryer. A message preview flashed on the screen. "Can't wait to see you tonight, Monsieur Smell." I froze. I wish I could tell you I didn't open it, that I respected privacy and boundaries. But when trust begins to crack, curiosity feels like survival. Her name was Danielle. I didn't know her, but I would come to know her. Scent, her voice, her shadow, in my house. The texts went back months. Photos, inside jokes, our song references that used to belong to us. My hands trembled as I scrolled, reading lines that hollowed me out from the inside. When he came home that evening, I didn't yell. I simply placed the phone on the table between us. "Who is she?" He stared at it, then at me. His lips parted, but no words came. Finally, he whispered, "It's not what you think." I almost laughed. "Then tell me what it is, Michael, because from here, it looks like a betrayal wrapped in perfume." He slumped into the chair. "It was a mistake," he said. "It's over." I remember how quiet the house felt. Even the air seemed to hesitate. I didn't throw him out that night. I wish I had. Instead, I told him I needed time. And when he cried, when he said, "Please, don't leave me," I believed he was sorry. So I forgave him, or I told myself I did. Forgiveness is a strange thing. People talk about it like it's a single act, a switch you flip, but it's not. It's a daily decision to set down the pain before it eats you alive. I tried. I really did. I went to counseling. I cooked his favorite meals. We sat through awkward silences and called it progress. I wanted to keep our family together, for the kids, for myself, for the version of us I wasn't ready to bury. But deep down, I could feel it, the quiet shift. He was present, but not there. His eyes drifted during conversations. He took longer showers, and sometimes I'd wake up to the sound of the basement door creaking open in the middle of the night. When I asked, he said he was checking the boiler. The third time it happened, I followed him, and that's when everything I thought I'd rebuilt came crashing down. The basement smelled like old paint and damp concrete. I stood at the top of the stairs, heart pounding. Michael's flashlight flickered below. He muttered something under his breath. I couldn't make out the words. When he went upstairs again, I waited until I heard the bedroom door close. Then I went down. At first, everything looked normal: boxes, old Christmas decorations, tools. But something felt off. There was a stack of folded blankets near the far wall, a coffee mug, a faint whiff of that same perfume. And behind the boxes, 2 suitcases. When I unzipped the first one, my breath caught. Clothes, makeup, a hairbrush. Danielle's name was written inside a notebook in the front pocket. She hadn't just been in my husband's life, she'd been living in my house. I stood there in that dim basement, surrounded by shadows and silence, feeling something inside me harden. All those nights he said he was working late. He'd been hiding her under our roof, and I had been sleeping above her. I went upstairs quietly, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at Michael's sleeping face. Forgiveness, I realized, had been my prison. The days that followed were a blur of polite smiles and hollow words. My husband David was on his best behavior, making coffee before I woke up, leaving small notes on the counter that said things like, "Love you, always." I tried to believe them, I really did. But it's hard to stitch trust back together when the threads keep slipping through your fingers. I started noticing little things again, small inconsistencies that pricked at me like splinters. His phone, which he used to leave charging on the nightstand, was now face down on silent. He'd take calls from work outside on the porch, pacing, voice low, and when I walked in unexpectedly, he'd hang up fast, too fast. Still, I told myself not to become that wife. The suspicious one, the one who checks phones and follows cars. But doubt, it has a sound. It hums in your ears at night, louder than your own heartbeat. One evening, I went to grab something from the basement, old Christmas decorations. I think I hadn't been down there in weeks. As soon as I flicked on the light, I noticed something odd. There was a faint smell, floral, artificial, like cheap body spray, the kind you'd smell in a teenager's locker room, not in our home. I frowned. The boxers near the back had been moved slightly, but enough that I could see fresh dust streaks where someone had dragged them. And behind those boxes, there was a small duffel bag, navy blue. I didn't recognize it. When I unzipped it, the scent hit me again. Inside were women's clothes, a soft pink sweater, folded neatly, a makeup bag, toothbrush, even a small framed photo of David, alone, smiling, the picture cropped from one of our vacation shots. I froze. For a moment, my body simply refused to process what I was seeing. Then, the realization seeped in like ice water. She had been here recently. The thought made my knees buckle. Was she staying here? Was she coming by when I was at work, when I went to visit my sister, when I was upstairs, maybe even sleeping? My hands shook as I shoved everything back into the bag, zipped it, and tucked it where I'd found it. I couldn't confront him. Not yet. Not when my heart was still learning to breathe again. That night, I watched him across the dinner table, his easy smile, his casual jokes about his coworkers, the way he reached across and touched my hand, like he always used to. My mind screamed liar, but my lips stayed still. I needed to know more. The next morning, after he left for work, I went back to the basement. I took pictures of everything, the bag, the clothes, the perfume. Then I waited. Over the next few days, I noticed a pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday, David came home later than usual. He always had the same excuse: late meetings, deadlines, traffic. But on those nights, that faint floral scent would linger again, drifting up the basement stairs. So one Thursday, I decided to stay home. I told him I had a migraine and couldn't make it to my evening class. He looked genuinely sympathetic, even kissed my forehead before leaving. "Get some rest," he said. But rest was the last thing on my mind. I waited until it was fully dark outside. Then, I turned off all the lights, sat in the quiet, and listened. Around 8:30, I heard the back door creak open, soft, hesitant, not like David's usual heavy-footed entrance. My pulse thudded in my ears. I moved slowly to the kitchen, careful not to make a sound. Through the crack in the basement door, I saw a faint light flicker on below. Someone was down there. I stood there, frozen, listening to soft footsteps, the rustle of fabric, the sound of drawers opening. My hand trembled on the doorknob. Then, I heard a voice, soft, female. She was humming a song I used to hum while cooking. Something inside me broke. I pushed the door open quietly and stepped down the stairs, one at a time. The air was thick, musty, heavy with that perfume. When I turned the corner, she jumped, a woman, mid-30s maybe, with tired eyes and a nervous smile. "Oh my God," she gasped, clutching the duffel bag. "You're not supposed to be here." I stared at her, unable to form words. "You're living here," I finally whispered. Her lips parted, then she sighed. He said you'd never find out." I think I stopped breathing. The edges of my vision blurred. "Get out." My voice was low, calm, and terrifying even to myself. "Now." She grabbed her things, stammering apologies, tears streaking down her cheeks, and I just stood there, motionless, until she was gone. When David came home that night, the house was quiet. I was sitting at the table with the duffel bag on top of it. His eyes went wide when he saw it. "Where is she?" he asked. Not "what is that," not "what happened." "Where is she?" That told me everything I needed to know. "Gone," I said, "and so am I." He tried to stop me, hands trembling, words spilling out, excuses, half-truths, begging, but my heart had gone somewhere he couldn't reach. I packed a single suitcase, walked out that door, and didn't look back. For the first time in years, the air outside felt clean, cold, but clean. And in that moment, I realized forgiveness doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes, it means finally walking away. When I left that night, I didn't cry. Not right away. The silence in my car was thick, the kind that presses against your chest and makes you aware of your own breathing. I drove without knowing where I was going. The highway signs blurred into streaks of green and white under the streetlights. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles ached, but I couldn't let go. Somewhere between exit signs and half-empty gas stations, the tears finally came. They came in waves, not loud, not hysterical, but steady, like the sound of rain tapping against the windshield. I didn't pull over. I just kept driving, crying in rhythm with the road. I ended up at a small roadside motel just outside the city, the kind of place that smelled faintly of old coffee and detergent, where the neon vacancy sign buzzed against the night sky. I checked in under my maiden name. When the clerk asked how long I'd be staying, I said, "Just tonight," even though I knew it wasn't true. The room was small, a single bed, a lamp with a crooked shade, and curtains that didn't quite close all the way. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. My wedding ring felt heavy, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I took it off and placed it on the nightstand. The small metallic click it made felt final. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman's face, startled, guilty, afraid. I saw David's eyes too, full of panic when he realized what I'd discovered. And beneath it all, I saw myself standing there, calm and broken at the same time. In the morning, the world looked different. The sky was a pale blue, the kind that comes after a storm. I sat by the window with a paper cup of coffee, watching the sunlight spill across the cracked parking lot. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be and no one waiting for me. It was terrifying, and somehow, it was freeing. I started making lists that day, not for groceries or chores, but for survival. Things like, call a lawyer, find a new place to live, tell mom, change the locks. I didn't know what life looked like after betrayal, but I knew it couldn't look like what it was before. When I finally went back to the house, not to stay, but to collect the rest of my things, I felt like a stranger walking into someone else's home. The smell of him was everywhere. His cologne, the faint trace of aftershave in the bathroom, the mug he always left by the sink. It was unbearable. I moved slowly, methodically. I took what was mine and left what wasn't. Every photo I packed felt like closing a chapter. Our wedding picture, the family Christmas portrait, the framed anniversary photo from Maui. Each one was a snapshot of a life that no longer existed. He came home halfway through. The door opened, and his voice called my name softly, like he was afraid I'd vanish if he spoke too loud. I didn't answer. I kept folding clothes into a suitcase. He stood in the doorway for a while before he said anything. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't turn around. "You meant for it to start," I said quietly. That was enough. There was a long pause. Then he said, "She had nowhere else to go." That made me laugh, bitter and tired. "So you gave her a place in our home, while I was upstairs, while I was forgiving you." He didn't respond, and in that silence, I realized that no explanation would ever make sense. Some betrayals don't need reasons. They just reveal who people really are. When I left again, I didn't look back. The house that once felt safe now felt haunted. Not by ghosts, but by memories. The following weeks were slow, quiet. I stayed with my sister for a while, in her guest room that smelled faintly of lavender and laundry detergent. She didn't ask many questions, just made tea and sat with me while the silence did the talking. Healing, I learned, isn't a straight line. Some days, I woke up feeling lighter, like maybe I'd finally outrun the hurt. Other days, it hit me all over again, sharp and sudden, like stepping barefoot on broken glass. I tried to fill the days with movement, walks through the park, volunteering at the library, reading books I'd forgotten I loved. It wasn't about distracting myself. It was about remembering who I was before I became someone's wife, someone's secret, someone's fool. And slowly, piece by piece, I started to come back to myself. There were small victories. The first time I laughed at something without feeling guilty. The first time I slept through the night without replaying that basement scene in my mind. I even started painting again. I hadn't picked up a brush in years, but one afternoon, I set up an easel by the window and let color spill across the canvas. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It felt like breathing again. Then, one evening, I got a call from David. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. His voice was quiet, defeated. He said he'd sold the house, our house, said he couldn't live there anymore. It doesn't feel like home without you, he murmured. I didn't respond right away. I looked at the fading light through my sister's curtains and felt a strange peace wash over me. Home, I finally said, was never about walls or furniture. It was about respect, and you broke that. He said nothing, and for the first time, that silence didn't hurt. When I hung up, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. Anger had burned away, leaving only clarity, a quiet understanding that sometimes forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in, it's about setting yourself free. That night, I stepped outside and looked up at the stars. The air was cool, the kind that smells faintly of rain and new beginnings. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. News travels fast in small circles, especially when it smells like scandal. Within weeks, whispers about David's affair had spread through our community like perfume spilled on silk, impossible to contain, impossible to ignore. I didn't tell anyone myself, but the story had a way of finding ears. Someone saw her leaving the house one morning. Someone else noticed his car parked outside her workplace. You know how people talk quietly at first, then louder when they think you're not listening. I kept my head down. I didn't owe anyone my pain, and I sure wasn't going to hand it out like gossip. But word found its way to people who mattered. His colleagues at the firm, our church friends, even his mother. His mother called me first. Her voice was trembling, equal parts shame and sorrow. I raised him better than this, she said softly. I don't know what got into him. I wanted to tell her not to blame herself. I wanted to tell her that sometimes good people do cruel things, and sometimes the cruelest thing you can do is keep forgiving them. But I didn't have the strength to be wise that day. I just said, he made his choices. After that, she stopped visiting him for a while. Even his own family couldn't look at him the same. It wasn't revenge I felt. Not exactly. It was justice. The quiet kind that doesn't need shouting. The kind that happens when truth finally steps into the light and says, I'm still here. David lost a few contracts. I heard clients didn't like the bad optics. His reputation, the one he'd built so carefully, started to crumble. And the woman, she vanished almost as suddenly as she'd appeared. No job, no apartment, no trace. Sometimes, I wondered where she went, what she told herself at night. Did she regret it? Did she think of me? Or was I just another casualty in a story she'd already rewritten? But then I'd remind myself, her story wasn't mine to finish. Around that time, I started therapy. I didn't tell many people. It felt private, sacred. My therapist was a gentlewoman named Evelyn with a voice like warm honey. The first thing she said to me was, you're allowed to feel betrayed without feeling broken. I cried when she said that, not because it was profound, but because it was the first time someone gave me permission to be hurt without being ashamed of it. In those sessions, I learned to sit with the silence, to breathe through the memories instead of drowning in them. We talked about boundaries, about worth, about the quiet power of choosing yourself after years of choosing someone else. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in fragments like sunlight through blinds. one sliver at a time. I got my own apartment, a small place downtown with a balcony that overlooked the park. I painted the walls the color of early morning light and filled the shelves with books I loved. There was no space in that home for lies or shadows, only peace. The first night I slept there, I lit a candle by the window and whispered to myself, "This is mine." And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. People started inviting me out again. Dinners, art shows, coffee catch-ups. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to answer questions or see pity in their eyes. But one evening, my sister convinced me to go to a gallery opening downtown. The place was filled with soft music and low laughter. The smell of wine and fresh paint mingling in the air. I wandered through the exhibits, pretending to study the art, but really just watching people. Their easy smiles, their lightness. I'd forgotten what that looked like. Then I met someone, not in a cinematic, love at first sight way, but quietly. His name was Samuel. He asked me about the painting I was staring at, and we ended up talking for an hour about color, grief, and how both can change with light. He didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer it. We just existed in that moment, two strangers standing in front of something beautiful, not needing to explain why we were there. Later, as I walked home, I realized something. Healing isn't about finding someone new to love, it's about finding new ways to love yourself. I still got letters from David sometimes, long, rambling ones about regret and forgiveness. I never replied. I read them once, then burned them in a small tin on my balcony. Watching the paper curl and blacken was strangely satisfying, like erasing old promises that no longer fit the person I'd become. One evening, about a year later, I ran into him at the grocery store. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in spirit. His eyes were tired, the kind of tired that comes from realizing too late what you've lost. We exchanged polite hellos. He asked how I was doing, and I said, "Better than before." He smiled faintly. "You look it," he said. There was nothing cruel in his tone, no bitterness, just acceptance. For the first time, I believed he meant it. As I walked away, I didn't feel anger or sadness, just gratitude that the woman who once begged for love had learned to live without it. Over time, people stopped whispering. Life moved on, as it always does. But I didn't go back to being the woman I was before. I couldn't. She was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone softer too, someone who knew her worth didn't depend on anyone's apology. In the end, that was the real victory. Not that he paid, not that she vanished, but that I survived. And on quiet evenings, when the light hits the walls just right, I still think about that night in the basement, not with pain anymore, but with understanding, because that was the night I found the truth. And in losing everything, I found myself. It's strange how life eventually folds back into quiet, how even the sharpest pain softens into memory. I used to think healing meant forgetting, but I've learned it's more about remembering without bleeding. These days, I wake up before sunrise. The city hums softly beneath my window, and I make coffee just the way I like it. 2 sugars, a little cream, no rush. I sit by the balcony, watching the sky turn from gray to gold, and I let myself feel proud, not because everything's perfect now, but because I made it here to peace on my own terms. I don't wear my wedding ring anymore. I keep it in a small wooden box, tucked away in the back of a drawer. Some days I forget it's even there. Other days, when I stumble upon it by accident, I smile, not with sadness, but gratitude. That ring used to symbolize love. Now it reminds me of resilience. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since before the affair. It began as therapy homework, but over time, it became ritual. Each night I write 3 things I'm thankful for, even if it's something small: the smell of rain, a good meal, a moment of laughter with a stranger. Healing, I've found, lives in the little things. My therapist, Evelyn, once told me, when you've been betrayed, your heart doesn't break, it rearranges itself. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. Betrayal doesn't end you, it remakes you. One afternoon, about 2 years after I left, I went back to the old house. It wasn't mine anymore. David had sold it after I moved out, but I parked across the street and just looked at it for a while. The new owners had painted the porch blue, planted roses along the fence. There was laughter spilling out from the open window, a child's voice, high and free. And for a brief moment, I felt the ache of what I'd lost, not the house itself, but the life I once thought would happen there, the dream I'd built room by room, promise by promise. But then, something deeper settled in peace, because I realized that house had been built on secrets, and love that needs hiding isn't love at all. I whispered a small prayer, not for him, not for her, but for myself, for closure, for peace that doesn't come from winning, but from letting go. Then I started my car, turned the corner, and never looked back. Months later, I ran into Samuel again, the man from the art gallery. We'd stayed in touch casually, a coffee here, a check-in there, but that day, something shifted. We sat in a cafe, sunlight falling between us like something sacred, and he said, "You seem lighter now." And I laughed, the kind of laugh that feels like it comes from the bones. I told him. I finally stopped trying to rewrite the past. He nodded. "That's how new stories begin," he said. "We didn't fall in love that day, not in the cinematic way people expect. But we started something honest, friendship, connection, maybe hope. I didn't rush it. I didn't label it. I just let it be what it was. Two people finding light after the storm." That night, when I came home, I sat on the balcony again. The air smelled like rain and jasmine. I thought about how far I'd come, from the woman who cried in a basement surrounded by someone else's clothes to the woman who could now sit under a soft night sky and feel whole. The hardest part of healing isn't walking away. It's staying gone. It's refusing to open doors that hurt you just because you're lonely. There were nights I almost did. Nights when the silence felt heavy, when the memories pulled at me like tides. But each time, I chose myself again. And that, I've learned, is what healing truly is. 1,000 small choices to not go back. Sometimes I still hear his name through friends, or whispers, or the occasional social post. He's remarried now, I think. I don't wish him pain. I hope he found the honesty he couldn't give me, because I found mine. And as for her, the woman from the basement, I never heard from her again. Maybe she moved far away. Maybe she started over too. I hope she learned something from it all, though not for my sake, for hers. The truth is, life isn't a movie. There's no final confrontation, no perfect justice. People hurt you, and you heal. You rebuild. You find new laughter, new quiet, new mornings that don't ache. And if you're lucky, you find yourself again, not the version who trusted too easily, or the one who forgave too soon, but the one who finally knows she doesn't need anyone's permission to be free. That's who I am now. Not the woman whose husband cheated, not the woman who found another woman's clothes in her basement, but the woman who walked out, rebuilt her world, and learned to smile again, without bitterness, without regret, because peace, I've learned, isn't something you find. It's something you decide you deserve. So tonight, I'll light my candle by the window like I always do. I'll write in my journal. I'll let the world be quiet, and I'll whisper a small thank you for everything that broke me, and everything that built me back stronger. Would I take him back if I could? No. Would I change what happened? Maybe once I would have said yes, but now, no. Because if none of that happened, I wouldn't be here standing in the glow of my own life, unafraid, unashamed, and finally, truly free. And maybe that's the lesson. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the thing that sets you free. So if you're listening, and you've been betrayed, and you don't know how to start over, hear me when I say this. You already have. The moment you stopped making excuses for someone who hurt you, you started healing. And that's the kind of strength no one can take away. Would you have done what I did? Would you have forgiven, or walked away sooner? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories from women who found their strength the hard way, and learned that sometimes losing everything is how you find yourself.